Hello, everyone. Today with us, we have Jillian Johnsrud, who paid off $55,000 in debt in about 3 years. And not only that, achieved financial independence by age 32. Jillian, how are you doing today?
Oh, good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to catch up.
Yeah, likewise. So tell me about your early journey of being in debt. How did you guys get into debt in the first place?
Yeah, so my husband brought about $35,000 of student loan debt into the relationship, and he had about 10,000 of credit card debt when we met. Which, for me, I was always kind of like money conscious or aware. I grew up without a lot of money and had like this desire and kind of intuition that, oh, money gives you options and it gives you choices. And like, I really wanted that. And then I actually, unbeknownst to me at the time, I had been in the hospital my senior year of high school and I did not know that I had like a $10,000, yeah, hospital bill that floated around for years. I actually didn't find out about it until, yeah, 2 or 3 years later.
Wow. That's actually something really good to dive into if you're up for it. Like, when you're a teenager, you're not really thinking about medical bills and that kind of thing, right? And so you're like right at that cusp though of like teenager slash adult. And so was that something that your parents were planning to pay for, or they're kind of like, hey, this is your thing to take care of?
It was something that kind of fell through the cracks. Very middle of my senior year, like January. I had turned 18 like 10 days before. So I was 18 and I signed myself into the hospital. Um, I was under the understanding that I had insurance and the insurance took care of it. Um, we never received a bill. We didn't know that there was a bill. Like there was literally zero communication until, gosh, it was like 4 or 5 years later when, my husband and I were actually thinking about buying our first house, and we had our credit run, and I got a bill from a collection agency in the mail a few weeks later, and I was like and that was the first time I'd heard of it, so it was kind of a mess, and I think some people might be able to relate, like, we were on that journey of we were trying to save money. We had paid off all of this debt. We were building an emergency fund, wanting to get started in investing. And then all of a sudden there was this very surprise $10,000 bill that came due. And it can be really discouraging. But now looking back, I'm like, it's just another bump in the road.
Yeah, well, so talking about the road, the journey, like you decided, hey, we're gonna put this all together. We realize we have $55,000 in debt. How did you decide to tackle it?
When we actually very first got married, someone at church, like really offhandedly, had said, hey, you guys have like both been kind of paying your bills on your own. After you get married, you should just save one of your incomes. Like you should just live on half. If you decide to have kids or whatever later, like that would give you more options. And they're gonna attach to that word options. I'm like, ooh, options. I like options. So we kind of started with this mentality of we'll just try to live on half. So initially, the other half went to paying down the credit card debt. My husband decided to join the military, and part of he could have gone the officer route because he had a degree, but because he went enlisted, they would pay off that $35,000 worth of student loans over the course of a couple years. Um, I moved back into my family's house while he was doing basic training and AIT. And so we saved all of that money to finish paying off the credit card debt. And, neither of us had high earning degrees. And I think it can be really discouraging when you have so much debt and you know you're not going to make a ton of money. So we really had to be creative of like, what are the options for us? Like, what do we like have the ability to kind of figure this out and be a little bit more creative?
Absolutely. And I think people can relate to that. I mean, I think there's kind of this idea that you have to make a lot of money, right, to be able to pay off debt in a short period of time, or that you have limited options. And so I love like a couple of the things that you mentioned were, well, your husband joined the military and it had some benefits where they helped pay off his student loans, and you moved back in at your family's home so that you could save money because you know that housing is one of the biggest expenses, right? So that's incredible. Okay, so you pay off your debt and then you guys decide you want to be financially independent. What caused that? Like what was the reason behind wanting to achieve financial independence?
Initially, because we weren't gonna be high income earners, that wasn't even on my radar. That wasn't something that I was like, "Yeah, we can totally do this," because it seemed like such a far leap from where we were. My first initial goal was maybe we could retire or at least to be financially independent by, like, 60. If we could do it by 60, like, that would be amazing. Uh, so we just kept up with it. We'll try to save half. We had the emergency fund. We decided to start figuring out how to invest, which was terrifying. And and it started to snowball. And the more momentum we gained and the more progress we experienced, like the easier it was to imagine, oh, like actually this is kind of going better than we expected. So maybe we can dream a little bit bigger.
So once you paid off the debt and you become financially independent at age 32, what was your income sources at that time?
So it was pretty much divided kind of evenly three ways. We had invested in like our Roth IRAs, we had a brokerage. So we had kind of the traditional index funds. At that point, we had two rentals that had pretty good cash flow. And my husband had been medically retired from the military. So all three of those, and we had paid off our house in cash, or, we didn't have any debt at that point. No more student loans, no car loans, no house payment. So each of those was about 1,500. So we had about 4,500 a month to work with. And we had taken a lot of mini retirements along the journey. And when we were 32, I wasn't like, and this is it. We're retiring forever. You know, so long, 9 to 5. We're out of here. Instead, I had one biological kiddo at the time. We had adopted three, and I found out I was pregnant. So we were going 1 to 5 in the span of 2 years. And when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, "Okay, hold up. I gotta pull an audible. We need a new plan. Like this, I am barely holding on. We are not adding an infant to this equation." And so the initial plan was, let's take a year off. We need a year off. We've had a very busy season in life. And so initially we just planned for a year off, and a year became two. And over time, I became more comfortable with the numbers. I think a lot of people, when they plan to retire early, there is this fear of like, is it enough? Have I saved enough? Like, what if this happens? What if that happens? Like, what if the situation changes? And my approach was like, I'm okay going back to work. Like, I never expected to retire early. We didn't fear employment. So we just took it 1 year at a time. And now I'm 41. So we're like nine years into this.
Well, that's incredible. So I think for people listening, if because I think a lot of times you think, okay, if you're a young married couple and you got, multiple income sources, that's great. But now you throw kids into the mix, right? How does that impact your financial independence journey?
I mean, it's expensive. For sure. Kids are a little bit of a wild card, especially having 5 kids. Where are they gonna wanna go to school, with housing and the cost of living, I now my kids are a little bit older. I've got, 2 teenagers, they're about to leave the nest, and I'm like, "Oh, this is a weird environment for them to go out into the world." Um, so I don't think you can ever have, like, this bulletproof plan of I absolutely have enough money to cover every potential life situation forever. And if you do get to that point, you've probably way oversaved. You've probably, hopefully not postponed life so long to achieve this enormous pile of cash. So kind of like when we stepped away from the 9 to 5 when I was 32, kind of just take it 1 year at a time and figure out every year what works best for us, what works best for our kids, what they need, how we can support them. And it's always changing.
One of the things you mentioned was mini retirements. Can you kind of go into what is a mini retirement?
I describe a mini retirement as any time you step away from your 9 to 5 for a month or longer to focus on something that matters to you. And so they can look a lot of different ways and they can serve a lot of different functions, but it is kind of taking this, some people call it a sabbatical or a career break, a gap year, whatever, whatever term you're comfortable with, but taking this intentional time.
So for you, what does that look like when you do a mini retirement? What are some of the things that you're trying to focus on when you take one?
So what I do personally and what I encourage like my clients to do is to pick 1 to 3 areas of focus. I think there can be this huge temptation, especially if we've been working really hard for a really long time. You're 10, 15, 20 years into a career and you've never had a break, to feel like there's 20 things I need to focus on. Like my bathroom needs to be remodeled and I need to lose weight and I need to focus on my mental health and I need to visit all my extended family and I want to do a massive road trip. And, you can kind of dilute your focus, which is why I always encourage people to retire often. This isn't a one and done. Plan to do this periodically and focus on different areas of your life. For us, sometimes it's travel. Sometimes it's, national parks. Last year, we took 8 months off, and my husband, we went down to Southern California, and he went back to school to study like auto mechanics for a semester because he is such a card nut, and it was like his little dream come true. Um, so we kind of take these times to focus on different areas. One summer, I took the summer off and I built a food forest in my backyard because I'm obsessed with gardening.
Well, that's awesome. So I think some people might say though, how do I do that if I have a 9 to 5, right? Because it's great if you achieve financial independence. So you're like, I can take 8 months off. But if I'm working a normal 9 to 5 and I get 2 weeks off a year, how do I retire often?
Yeah. So there's 2 ways, especially if you're looking at a shorter mini retirement, like 1 or 2 months. Oftentimes you can negotiate that with your employer. And the reality is, a lot of times people will say to me, like, but my job is really important. I'm really important. I'm really essential. There's no way that they can survive without me. And the advantage, if you are really important in your role, is that you're also probably really hard to replace. It's going to take a long time for them to hire someone else. It's going to take a long time for them to train someone else. So usually HR will do the easiest and the quickest and the simplest solution. And that might just be giving you a month off. Might be way easier than finding someone to replace you long term. So for shorter ones, I always encourage people to try to negotiate that. For longer ones, it often makes sense to do it in between jobs, which can be another great financial benefit because it can give you kind of that motivation to switch jobs. And I've had a lot of clients and friends who in switching, taking a year off and switching jobs, they got substantial increases in pay when they came back to a new job. So much so that it, within a year or two, covered the entire cost of their mini retirement.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind is I think a lot of times it's in our head that, oh, this is not possible, right? And what you're saying is, well, other people have done it. And here's kind of some things that you could do, like go to your HR and say, hey, I'm really overwhelmed and I got all these things going on. I really want to focus on this for a month. Is it possible? What would it take to make that possible, right? Or like you said, between career transitions, like going from one to the other, is there a way they should prepare for a mini retirement? Because I'd imagine you can't just go from like working full time, 40, 50 hours a week to, okay, now let's just go away for a month.
Yeah, I would say the biggest mistake I see, the most frequent mistake I see when people take a mini retirement is just winging it. Like there's this idea of as long as I'm not working, everything will be great. Like if I can just subtract my employment, everything else in my life will be better. And the reality is it takes some planning and it takes some thoughtfulness. And especially if you're married, it takes a lot of conversations of, what both people want this to look like, what their expectations are. And with a little bit of planning, people can make the experience significantly better and smoother.
I heard this quote once that people spend more time planning their vacation than they do planning their retirement. And so, but there is a lot of benefit to that, right? Like if you're going to do a mini retirement, you're like, hey, I want to be intentional. I don't, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. If you're getting a month off and you normally get 2 weeks off. And so really plan for that. So what are some of the takeaways that you've had from your own mini retirements?
We've done a dozen of them, and they've kind of spanned the whole spectrum. We've done a lot of, travel ones, a lot of extended family ones. I think, especially in the US, where we can be really spread out, it's so tough if you only get 2 weeks of vacation a year to have time for that extended family. There's oftentimes two sets of parents, and your sisters and your brothers and your cousins and your aunts and your uncles and like your friends from college. Like, there's all these people that you want to see, and it's not always realistic to maintain those connections. So mini retirements for us have been fantastic for like being able to travel to people that also only have 2 weeks off and maintaining all of those relationships and really investing in those for us and for our kids. Over, like I mentioned, I built out my garden one year. This last year and the year before, I really focused on my health. I turned 40 and I was like, yeah, it's time to figure this adult stuff out. I need to my adult body is a little less forgiving than my 20-year-old body, and I need to figure out how to take care of it a little bit better. Um, and being outside of our house and outside of our routine, and having a whole bunch of responsibilities taken off of my plate, it's so much easier to focus on developing new habits and a new lifestyle than, when you're kind of in the thick of it.
That's incredible. Yeah, I think trying to figure out what you value and then figure out what you need to do to achieve that, right? Like you said, with your health or your gardening, whatever it might be. Um, One of the things that I realized getting older is I wake up and I'm hurting. It's like I just slept wrong or something, right? So I'm curious, like on the road when you're traveling, things are different, right? Like you might be sleeping in a place you're not familiar with, or you might not have all the comforts that you have at home. How do you guys kind of, especially with a car full of kids, how do you deal with kind of the differences and the changes and making sure that you are able to focus on the things that you're trying to accomplish for your mini retirement?
Yeah, we travel with a camper. We pull a camper behind our vehicle, and a big part of the reason we do that is because it removes so many of those variables. Like, we're able to pack so much of our home into our camper, whether it's our kids' school stuff or, our the food we like, or, all of those comforts of home. Because traveling with five kids is harder than living in a house with five kids. Any way that we can kind of minimize that and make it easier. And I think it's important for everyone to realize, like, probably more is possible than you think. But also making accommodations. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. I would love to travel overseas with my kids. I would love it. I'm so excited to do that. Um, they're not ready. Like, it's not the year yet. Every time we took them, this last trip, we did 6 days in Disney in Florida. And we were at, I think, Epcot, the one where it has like all the fake little countries, and you walk around and you're in like fake China and fake France and fake Canada. And we're walking around, and my 8-year-old is like, this is so boring. Why are we here? And I thought, oh no, if he doesn't like Disney France, he's definitely not gonna like real France. Like, this is way cooler than real France. And I was like, yeah, we're not ready yet. We're not ready. So, yeah, enjoying the things that you can enjoy and figuring out what would work for your family.
Absolutely. That's the really good distinction, I think, as far as like traveling overseas. We have a 7 and a 9-year-old, and we thought about that as well. But my wife likes museums of like old stuff. And I'm like, my kids, well, they have ADHD. They're not going to be able to focus. They'll be like, let's go to a park or let's go someplace else, like, so yeah, really knowing your family and what, I think we could idealize, right? Like, oh, it'd be great to do like a safari in Africa with your kids. And I'm like, I don't know if I want my 7-year-old with ADHD hyperactiveness being by a lion in a safari right now. So for people that are interested in kind of doing a mini retirement, what would you recommend for them to kind of start planning?
I always encourage people um, to think about what is going to be the theme. Like, what's going to be the focus? What is it that you guys need right now? And what do you need first? So that can be whatever's most important. A lot of people, I think I saw a stat, like 89% of Americans have felt burned out in the last year. And if it's been a long time since you've taken a break, you might be burned out. And so that first mini retirement might just be focused on rest and like joyful activities. Like, you might not jump into this kind of stressful, massive vacation. Optimize for the thing that you need the most. Even if you travel and you really need rest, make it restful travel, not like a stressful, sometimes we plan those 1 week, 5-day vacations and you kind of need the vacation from the vacation. Like, don't plan a trip like that. Um, Plan something that's actually restful. And then, there's the budgeting side, which oftentimes mini retirements end up being much more affordable than your typical vacation. So I think a lot of people are surprised at, oh, like if I'm not super rushed, if I'm not dealing with this huge time crunch, there's a lot more of affordable options that I now have access to. And then yeah, just negotiating the time off.
Okay, so what kind of tips do you have for people to make a mini retirement actually affordable?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of options depending on kind of your stage in life. I know a lot of people who, if you're kind of single in your 20s or 30s, uh, like youth hostels can be a fantastic option. Some people do volunteering at different farms where you can stay for free, but finding, accommodations is a big one, but finding the thing that does make it affordable for us, with our camper, we rent our house out while we travel. And the amount that we bring in rent actually covers almost all of our travel costs. So our life cost is very similar whether we're living at home or whether we're traveling for months on end. And there again, when you have more time, travel tends to become more affordable. If you, like a family of 4 was going to go to Paris for 5 days, that's probably about the cost it would be to live in France for a month. Um, and so when you stretch things out, a lot of a lot of things become just more economical because you can travel slower, just the rhythms of life. It's fun to eat out when you're vacationing, but if you're going to be gone for a month, most people don't want to eat out 90 meals in a row. Here and there, it's fun. And so you can rent an Airbnb or do different kinds of accommodations and cook a little bit more and kind of just have a more relaxed pace.
One thing that you mentioned that I think I didn't even think of was renting your house out while you're on your mini retirement, right? So you're like, why don't I bring in income from this asset that's sitting here while I'm gone? Now, I think some people would be like, oh man, how would I do that? I have so many personal belongings and, I have things the way I want it. How do you guys prepare for that?
So we've done it a number of times, and I will say the first time is the biggest hassle. Just because your house everything has to be clean, everything has to be organized. And so the thing that comforts me in this process is that I'm coming home to the way I want my house to be. I'm coming home to every closet kind of cleaned out and organized. But on the personal stuff, we don't do a ton of work. I would say it takes us 4, 6 hours. We don't do Airbnb. We don't do short term. So people aren't looking for like a hotel. We're renting our house, for a month or longer. And it's usually sometimes people will say, well, I don't really live in an area where people would want to rent my house out. We typically find people who are moving to the area and want a temporary furnished place while they look for and purchase a home. And I think that's true for a lot of different areas and cities in the country. You always have those people who need that temporary furnished place, but they want something a little bit more cozy than a motel for, 2 or 3 months. We do a couple little things like, we take out our tax documents, all the clothes in my closet, I put them in a bin, I shove them under the bed. Uh, I have some we lived in Germany and I bought a bunch of Polish pottery. I put it in a little box and I put it on the top shelf and say, "Do not use." But pretty much everything else kinda just stays the way it is. Let's say we rent our house out for 2,000 a month. If we're gone for 6 months, I just have to tell myself in my head, if there's damage, as long as it's not $12,000, if it comes in under $12,000, like, we're ahead in the deal because this is money that, like, we wouldn't be bringing in either way. And so whenever it's a hassle, like, and I think anytime, especially as families, you're getting ready for a trip, the few days before is always a little stressful, and now we're trying to, like, clean our house and, like, make sure everything's organized, but I'm always like, "Oh, but it's not $12,000 hard." Like, yeah, it's, like, an extra day of hassle, but it's not $12,000 hard.
Now, how do you find people that want to like? I feel like that's such a niche. You're trying to find people that are coming into town to buy a house that need a place for an extended period of time. How do you typically find people?
We have the best luck, in local Facebook groups. We also live in an area where housing is kind of tight. There's not a tremendous amount of options, um, especially in, like, standalone houses, and especially in places that are furnished. We also allow pets, and almost no place with furniture, that comes furnished allows animals. But we have I don't know, we have so many animals and so many kids. I'm like, honestly, no one's gonna be harder on our house than we are. Like anything really nice, is been gone for a long time. So, uh, I try not to stress about it too much.
Well, that's awesome. So I know you have a podcast too, right? Called Retired Often. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people like the idea of a mini retirement, but it can be so overwhelming and scary, and most people haven't they don't have a lot of friends and family who've done it. So on the podcast, I just interview people who've done mini retirements and try to get the logistics from them. How did they get the time off? How did they save? What did it cost? What did they do? You know, what was kind of transformative about it? Because I think the more stories you hear, the more you can go, oh, like that connects with me, that resonates, or that makes sense. Um, and so, yeah, I like sharing those stories because in my work, I do one-on-one coaching and group coaching, and so I get to hear all the stories, and I've done it a lot of times. So I'm like, oh no, it's totally possible. Like, you just do these things, it'll be great. But wanting to kind of share that social circle in a way with a bigger audience.
That's awesome. Well, I'll make sure to link to that below the show here. I know you also have a workbook to help people, right? When it comes to trying to figure out a mini retirement, what does that entail?
Yeah, so mini retirements are one of those things that can aren't necessarily intuitive. But having walked so many people through this, I'm like, actually, there's just some steps. There's some steps. If you take them, this is going to go so much smoother. So there's 4 big steps that I outline in the workbook, from planning to the employment, the finances, and then the last one's like navigating unexpected things because there can be some surprises on the other end, that I want people to, sail through smoothly. Um, but yeah, it's about just shy of 100 pages, but it really, if you put 5 or 6 or 7 hours of effort into planning this, you're gonna have a lot more confidence, and and it's just gonna go so much better.
Wow, that's incredible. 100 pages. And that's a free workbook, right?
That one is not, but I do
Okay.
have some free, I have a sample of the workbook on my site that's for free, just those initial kind of planning questions of what this might look like, and that's retireoften.com/mini. So you'll get, I think, the first, like, 10 pages.
Awesome. Well, Jillian, if people really resonated with your story, where's the best place for them to connect with you?
The best place is probably my newsletter. Those are probably my closest peeps. But on social media, I'm at Jillian Johnsrud. Yeah, the podcast is Retire Often. The website's Retire Often, and the book will come out next year. That's called Surprise, Surprise, Retire Often.
That's awesome. Well, Jillian, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.